and trade is of vital importance, and that these are indeed unique relations that are tremendously mutually beneficial to both our nations. Our partnership is not just forged by our shared geography, it is also shared by our similar values, common interests, strong personal connections, which include family connections. But perhaps most relevant to the subject of our debate today, it is based on deep and powerful economic ties. Millions of jobs depend upon trade and investment between Canada and the United States. We are each other's largest trading partners, with nearly $3.6 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border each day in 2023. And our government has worked tirelessly to strengthen and secure the relationship by supporting and helping ensure the safe flow of goods and people across the border, and that is vital to both our country's economic competitiveness and prosperity. As key parts of our efforts were in securing the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, which entered into force in July 2020. This agreement is the anchor for our strong, balanced trading relationship with the United States, and the foundations for this relationship are built on the resilient and effective supply chains that carry across all key sectors of the economy. As a result, today we are each other's largest trade partners with, as I said, nearly $3.6 billion worth of goods and services crossing the borders each day. Canada is particularly significant as a secure supplier of energy to the United States domestic market. Last year, for example, 60% of U.S. crude oil imports originated from Canada. Canada and the U.S. also have significant investment relationship. The U.S. is the single greatest investor into Canada. Madam Speaker, these trade and investment relations support millions of jobs here in Canada, but they also support millions of jobs in America. And that's because today Canada buys more from the United States than China, Japan, and Germany combined. Maintaining and expanding this flow of goods, of investment, and of people across the border is absolutely vital for both our countries' economic prosperity. But by the same token, undermining the effectiveness of this relationship by imposing tariffs on Canadian exports to the United States would take us into the opposite direction. There should be no doubt that by imposing a 25% tariff on all Canadian products, it would be harmful to U.S. consumers, to U.S. workers, and to the U.S. economy as a whole. In fact, roughly 70% of Canadian goods exported to the United States are used in the production of other goods, or as they say, advanced manufacturing, by U.S. manufacturers. This means that imports from Canada are effectively feeding the U.S. economy, the U.S. industry, with vital inputs, making it stronger and more competitive. It also means that putting a 25% tariff on these Canadian imports would impose a massive increase into input costs on U.S. manufacturers. But the harm of American manufacturers wouldn't stop there, Madam Speaker. That's because American tariffs on Canadian goods would open the door to retaliatory tariffs, and that's something we don't want to do, Madam Speaker. I went across several states in the United States in the last 9 years in my parliamentary duties, and especially during the renegotiations of CUSMA, working with the National Governors Association, the Western Governors Association, and I can assure you that 36 U.S. states currently still rely on Canada as their #1 export market, and over 40 states export more than $1 billion per year into Canada. And raising the cost of those goods would not just be bad for Canadian consumers, but it would be really bad for American manufacturers and their consumers who depend on those sales. Our government doesn't want to go down that road, Madam Speaker. We know that efficient trade is the way to secure strong economies on both sides of the border. We know because since 1989, the North American Free Trade Agreements have generated economic growth and rising standards of living for both the people of all three member countries. The entry into force of NAFTA in 1994 created the largest free trade region in the world. And by strengthening the rules and procedures governing trade and investment in North America, the agreement has proven to be a solid foundation for building Canada's prosperity and has set a valuable example of the benefits of trade liberalization for the rest of the world. So what does it mean for Canada, Madam Speaker? it meant that our total merchandise exports to the United States in 2018 reached $438 billion, representing a four-fold increase from $101 billion in 1989 before this agreement. Such a dramatic expansion of Canadian exports to a single country is unprecedented, Madam Speaker. And NAFTA's most recent successor has made us even stronger. So we can see here in clear and unequivocal terms how free and fair trade between Canada and the United States benefits both our countries. And we're communicating these points as signaling our readiness to the incoming administration to work together to advance our shared economic prosperity and security. In doing so, we'll remain open to the perspectives of our American partners, and in fact, we share many of those perspectives. We share U.S. concerns regarding unfair competition and global market distortions, including overcapacity caused by non-market policies and practices that harm our workers and our businesses. And we can assure our American partners that Canada will not be a transshipment risk or a vector for trade practices that would harm our collective economic security. To take just one example, Canada imposed a 100% surtax in October on electric vehicles and a 25% surtax on steel and aluminum products from China. And Canada is considering additional surtaxes on imports of batteries and battery parts, semiconductors, solar products, and critical minerals from China. We will always defend Canada's interests and do what is best for Canadians and the Canadian economy. And we will always do so on the understanding that Canada and the U.S. have a unique relationship and a unique partnership. And that this partnership works best, creating jobs, economic growth, and shared prosperity on both sides of the border, when we work together in common purpose and understanding. Thank you for the opportunity to make this case, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de...
Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Madam Speaker, I enjoyed my colleagues' comments, and the reality is that it is important that we all stand together. We make sure that we are pushing back against the Trump tariffs. But he comes from British Columbia, as do I. And he can recall, I believe, what was the biggest failure in trade history in Canada, and that was the infamous Harper softwood lumber sellout that took place 20 years ago. Now, the results of this was after a series of victories that we'd had in trade tribunals and courts. We were just at the victory line. And then the Conservatives basically stole defeat, snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. And the results were the following, Madam Speaker. We were forced to pay $1 billion that legitimately would have come back to softwood lumber, the softwood lumber industry in Canada. We lost 100,000 jobs, 200 mills closed as a result of this Harper's folly, this unbelievable, irresponsible approach on trade by Conservatives. I wanted to ask my colleague if he thinks we can gain some lessons from that appalling sellout of our natural resources and our softwood communities and workers.
Good question. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, that's a great question, and I do recall that very vividly. And it was no small failure. I believe that's set a very bad precedent since then to capitulate after winning victory after victory on softwood lumber industries. And I commend our trade ministers for holding their feet to the Americans, winning case by case and not capitulating. But what he said is no different than what Prime Minister Harper said when we're renegotiating NAFTA. He said, take any trade deal they give. Just take it. And their leader, the Conservative opposition at the time, Erin O'Toole, said, don't put countervailing tariffs. He said, don't put countervailing tariffs. Was scared to put any tariffs. In fact, it was those tariffs, it was the strong negotiations that we were able to get back the deal and make an even stronger free trade deal with the United States.
Questions and comments. Honourable Member for La Salle-Verdun. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's been 2-3 hours that I've been following the debate, and the parties are attacking each other. We would have done this better. No, we were better. We are hearing the differences between the different provinces. But there was a message from President-elect of the U.S. on his social network, and the outcome is this emergency debate. So, seen from Washington, they might be saying Canadians are freaking out, they are afraid. I think Americans have more to lose if they are not going to trade with us than the opposite. So I would like to ask my esteemed colleague, without really criticizing the debate tonight, but can we not just calm down and negotiate responsibly and not be intimidated by the move by the President-elect?
Thank you for my colleague for the great question. I think that is the approach if you saw what the government has been taking. Prime Minister is meeting with all the premiers of the country to find out a proper strategy. My speech didn't actually target anybody from the opposition in that regards. I just answered a question in the question just before you from my colleague as to the approach that they had taken for the Conservative Party versus the Liberal government of this tenure. But it is an all-Canada approach that needs to be done. Canada should not freak out. You're absolutely right. I think the U.S. has more to lose, but I think this emergency debate demonstrates that we need a Team Canada approach. We need to talk to all our provinces, all our territories, all our members of Parliament. And there were some great opposition members at that time that helped. Rona Ambrose, I remember helped with the Team Canada approach, even though she's from the Conservative Party. She was tasked with it. Brian Mulroney, another great leader of the Conservative Party, jumped in. They did not act in those manners which were detrimental to Canada, but they acted in a manner that was supportive. But I think those days of Conservative leadership is long gone. The new leadership is more about themselves, as we've seen in other matters. But I thank you and your party for continue to show the support that Canada should be strong in this, and the Americans would have to capitulate to their own tariffs at the end of the day.
I have the honour to inform the House that a message has been received from the Senate informing the House that the Senate has passed the following bill, to which the concurrence of the House is desired. Bill S-249, an act respecting national action for the prevention of intimate partner violence. J'ai l'honneur de faire savoir.
I have the honor of informing the House that the Senate sent a message to the House to inform that the bill S-249, an act respecting national action for the prevention of intimate partner violence.
Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's a privilege to rise in this House today, as it always is, and as we speak today about in this important debate about the prospect of tariffs proposed by President-elect Trump. This is an important moment for our country, and it's an important moment for us to reflect and to respond in a way that is important and beneficial not just to Canadians but to our shared North American prosperity. Let's understand the facts. North America, and in particular Canada and the United States, have a strong and unbreakable relationship that dates back decades, centuries. And when it comes down to this conversation, it's important to start with the facts. We know in Canada that our biggest market is the United States, and for both of our governments, our economic prosperity, our future is predicated on the idea that we must work together because our economies are intrinsically linked and entirely intertwined. Canada has much to be proud of. We are a world leader, from batteries to clean energy, from AI to agriculture. We are a world leader. We are a place that investors from around the world want to place bets. They want to be here. They want to be part of the growth that is happening in Canada. Indeed, Canada is set to be the fastest growing economy in the G7 in 2025. Now, there are concerns that we all share about making sure we have a safe and secure border, to make sure that our communities are safe and secure, and we're all working hard to do that, and we're working with the Americans, as we have always done, to ensure that our border is safe. For our government, standing up to meet domestic and international challenges is not just about partisan politics. It's about working together and having a united approach as Canadians. It's an approach that worked in 2016 for us, and it's an approach that will work in 2025. Because, after all, our shared prosperity, Madam Speaker, is built on a set of facts, and the facts are clear. In 2023, bilateral trade between our two countries was $1.3 trillion. That's about $3.4 billion in trade every single day. For 36 U.S. states, Canada is the #1 market. The U.S. is our top merchandising trading partner with almost, in fact, over $500 billion of Canada's merchandise being sent in 2025. The U.S. is the single greatest investor in Canada. In 2022, stock investment was over $500 billion, representing half of all investment in Canada. Because this is a generational relationship, Madam Speaker. It isn't one that was crafted overnight. It is something that has been built over successive governments of all political parties, because we have taken an approach that working together is the right way to share prosperity. It's the right way to build prosperity. So as we think about those facts, it's important to remember a couple of things. From the opposition, we hear bluster, we hear paranoia, we hear people, as the Prime Minister said earlier, freaking out. And that's not what Canadians need. Canadians need to see strong, calm, resolute leadership that is predicated on the idea that when you are crafting a good deal, you don't need a winner and a loser. If we build together correctly with our American friends, we will build shared prosperity in a win-win situation. That is the approach our government has always taken. It's the approach we take to everything that we do, that rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the approach that we have taken and we intend to take in working with the incoming U.S. administration. It means having meaningful conversations, as the Prime Minister has already done with President-elect Trump. It doesn't mean gaslighting Canadians. It doesn't mean making idle threats. And it certainly does not mean raising a level of panic. What it means is that hard work, working on the challenges that we face, that we share, and building on our common interests is how we get over the finish line on these matters, just like we have done in the past. Whether it's around security, whether it is around technology, whether it is around natural resources, our economies are inextricably linked. These tariffs hurt us all. They don't just penalize Canada, they penalize U.S. consumers. They make goods more expensive for Americans. Whether it's food or auto parts or energy, all of these things will have an impact on Americans just as they would have an impact on Canadian businesses. So when we look at how to come through this period of opportunity and through this challenge, it's important for us to remember that the best approach that we can have is not to tear Canada down. It's not to approach this from a position of weakness, because we're not in a position of weakness. We are partners with our American friends, as we have been for generations, and as we will be for generations. And if we take that approach and we take pride in what Canada is and who we are and what our resources are, what our intellectual capacities are, we have the ability to do anything. And putting Canada first is always going to be our government's priority. But putting Canada first does not mean that it has to be at the detriment of our friends and neighbors. In fact, putting Canada first means success not just for Canadians, but for our American friends as well. A strong Canadian economy is good for the United States, just as a strong U.S. economy is good for Canada, if we do the work of working together to ensure that our shared priorities are considered, that the concerns that each of our countries has is reflected in the decisions that we make, and if we are prepared to have difficult conversations with one another. That is what we have always done. Empty slogans get us nowhere. Being negative gets us nowhere. What does get us somewhere is rolling up our sleeves and doing the hard work that is required to get to good deals. Madam Speaker, I spent years living in the United States. I studied there. Some of my best friends are Americans, and the privilege that I have had of being able to understand working in the United States and in Canada has been that we have so much in common. We all want to do well for our communities and our families. We want to build national prosperity, but we also want to look out for our friends and neighbors. We want to make sure the people that we care about are taken care of. And I think that's an important principle as we enter into conversations and we build the Team Canada approach. This is a time for us to put aside differences and to focus on what's important. What's important is making sure that Canadian interests are protected. What's important is to understand our shared interests. What's important is to understand the areas of opportunity for both countries and to build with resolution into those areas of strength and opportunity. Because in so doing, we will strengthen our economy, we will strengthen the U.S. economy. As we look at North America, we will strengthen the Mexican economy, and we will build a strong economic ecosystem that allows for small and large businesses to prosper, for Canadians and Americans and Mexicans to prosper, and most importantly, for us to continue to share those things that we have in common while also celebrating the things that make Canada unique. And that's why, Madam Speaker, we've already started the work, whether it's working with our premiers from coast to coast to coast or engaging with the incoming administration in the United States. Our job is to work for Canadians. Our job is to make sure that Canadians see a government that is capable of handling difficulties and difficult situations with measured, thoughtful responses, by showing up in conversations, by being willing to listen to points of view that are different from ours, but by never backing down on things that matter most to Canadians and to our prosperity. And so the point that I would emphasize, Madam Speaker, is that our history is clear. Our history has been one of getting good deals done in the interest of Canada. The Conservative record on this is suspect at best. They would capitulate at every turn. Our job and our opportunity and our track record is one of making sure that Canadian interests are protected, but that it is done in a way that the partners with whom we do these deals also feel like they are benefiting. And that is how good deals get done. Good deals are done when people respect one another, when we talk about the things that need to get done, and we do them together. That's an important lesson, I think, for all of us in this House as we engage in this debate. But perhaps the most important lesson I think that we should all take away from tonight's conversation is the deep care that all of us are showing in ensuring that Canada's interests are protected. What I think is different, Madam Speaker, is that there are many of us, certainly all of us on this side of the House, that believe that putting Canada's interests first means being able to work with others, being able to have difficult conversations, being able to negotiate, being able to be strong in our values, and being able to put those values at the center of every conversation we have. Because economic prosperity is built on the idea, ultimately, that we take the best of who we are, we support that, we grow, and we prosper on the backs and on the intellect and on the minds and on the hearts of every Canadian from coast to coast to coast. Our businesses, big and small, have a role to play in this conversation, as do American businesses. And it's my hope and my aspiration, and I think that everyone on this side of the House, our aspiration, that by taking a Team Canada approach, by showing a unified front and a willingness to negotiate, a willingness to work hard without compromising on what is important to Canada, that we will create a win-win-win situation for all of our partners here in North America. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Edmonton-Griesbach.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Tonight we've heard a lot about a united Canada. We heard a lot about a Canada first. But what we're not hearing, in particular from the leader of the Conservative Party, when he speaks of a weak Prime Minister, when he speaks of a weak Liberal Party, he happens to also represent the National Conservatives here in Canada, that no one in our country is buying the fact that this guy, the leader of the Conservative Party, is in any way, shape, or form opposed to his big brother, his best friend, Donald Trump. That's been clear. Canadians know this. He gets his talking points directly from the guy. Does the member believe in any of the words, especially the words coming from the leader of the Conservative Party, in relation to any of the real fact to this issue or his opposition to Trump?
The honourable member for the honourable parliamentary secretary. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. Look, I don't believe much of what the Leader of the Opposition says. When it comes to protecting Canadian interests, here's an individual who refuses to get a security clearance to ensure that he has the information to protect his own party, let alone his own country. Here's a man who speaks of freedom but refuses to let his members of his caucus speak freely or vote their conscience or to represent the interests of their constituents. But what troubles me most, Madam Speaker, is the fact that when there is an opportunity to talk Canada up, when there is an opportunity to focus on the strength that this country has economically, the Conservative leader chooses to talk Canada down at every single turn, to make up facts, to present whatever he's seen on the internet as somehow being relevant. And all that does is break and shake the confidence of Canadians. But, Madam Speaker, Canadians know better. They know that facts matter, and they know that this is the best country in the world. We've got work to do, but they will see the numbers to 2025 and know that this is going to be the fastest growing economy in the G7.
Questions et commentaires? The honourable member Skeena-Balclay Valley.
Speaker, my colleague is also a fellow British Columbian, and I know he understands the very desperate state of British Columbia's forest industry. In the region I represent, we've lost numerous sawmills over the past several years across British Columbia, many more. And the current softwood lumber dispute with the United States is a worrisome contributing factor to the downfall of the forest industry. Now, when the softwood lumber agreement and the softwood lumber dispute is raised in the House, often we hear platitudes and rhetoric along the lines of taking the issue very seriously, working in a concerted manner. We rarely hear unique and new strategies for actually addressing and resolving the dispute with the Americans. And so my question through to my colleague across the way, what ideas does the Liberal government have for resolving this dispute? We hear that it's a priority for them, and yet we don't see very much progress in terms of resolving it. What ideas, what strategies can be brought to the fore?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank my honourable colleague for his question. I share his concern for the forestry sector in British Columbia that tragically actually took its biggest hits as a result of decisions made by the Harper government, of which the current leader of the Conservatives was a member. Look, we all know that the incoming President of the United States is a deal maker. And this is an opportunity for us. I think this is a chance for us to sit down with somebody who likes getting a good deal done, and to sit down at the table and say, these are the concerns that have been lingering for quite some time. It is in your interests, Mr. President, to get this over the finish line, because it'll make home building, it'll make construction better and cheaper in your country, and it'll continue to support businesses in my home province. This is an opportunity to sit down with somebody who at their core loves the art of the deal.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Edmonton-Greensboro, a quick question.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. New Democrats have been consistent in our approach to strengthen our industries here in Canada and strengthening good-paying union jobs. How we do that is making certain that we have predictability for both export of goods and the creation of those goods from raw material and value-added production for those goods here at home. Why has it taken so long, and still even today, for the government, and the Liberals in particular, to reject this strategy? Why not participate in a policy like New Democrats are calling for, which is to increase our ability to create value-added products that we can make here at home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, a brief answer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a very good question. Look, I think a strategy, any strong economic strategy has to encompass all elements. It's not an and or. It's not a this or that. It can be both. And I think we do need to talk about how we continue to build industry and to take elements from natural to production in this country, just as we do need to do other parts of the supply chain. That's the beauty of having an integrated North American economy. It allows us to be able to play in any and all portions of those sectors in the economy.
Resuming debate, the honour member for Wellington-Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be splitting my time with the member for Charlesbourg, St. Charles. Madam Speaker, let's go back 10 years ago to 2014. On April 30th, 2014, the New York Times published an article titled, "Life in Canada, Home of the World's Most Affluent Middle Class." In that article, it said that median income in Canada appears to have surpassed median income in the United States based on more than 3 decades of international income surveys analyzed. That was in April 2014. Fast forward almost a decade to 2022. The current government at the time had been in power for 6 years. And on April 8th of that year, in 2022, the Minister of Finance delivered her budget 2022. And in that budget, the government published a chart on page 25 titled, "Average Potential Annual Growth in Real GDP Per Capita, Selected OECD Countries, 2020 to 2060. In this chart, Canada is dead last. I don't know who put that chart in the government's budget, and I suspect it wasn't the minister's exempt staffers, and I suspect it wasn't the minister herself. I suspect it was Finance Canada officials who put it in the budget to demonstrate how much trouble Canada's economy was in after 6 years of the government's fiscal and economic management. That chart, where Canada was dead last in projected per capita GDP growth in selected OECD economies from 2020 to 2060, is an indictment at that time, was an indictment of the government's economic policies. But despite that chart being in the budget, and despite a number of people commenting on that chart, the government failed to heed the principles of good budgeting and fiscal management. It failed to heed the principles outlined by former Liberal Finance Minister Paul Martin in his budget speech of 1996. And I am going to quote from that budget speech because I think it's instructive for the House, and I think the government should heed the lessons. Quote, "Here are our principles. First, governments created the deficit burden, and so governments must resolve it by focusing first in their own backyards, by getting spending down, not by putting taxes up. Second, our fiscal strategy will be worth noting if at the end of the day we have not provided hope for jobs and growth. We must focus on getting growth up at the same time as we strive to get spending down. Third, we must be frugal in everything we do. Waste in government is simply not tolerable. Fourth, we must forever put aside the old notion that new government programs require additional spending. They don't. What they do require is the will to shut down what doesn't work and focus on what can. That is why a central thrust of our effort is reallocation. Whether on the spending side or on the revenue side, every initiative in this budget reflects a shift from lower to higher priority areas. Finally, we must always be fair and compassionate. It is the most vulnerable whose voices are often the least strong. We must never let the need to be frugal become an excuse to stop being fair." That was Finance Minister Paul Martin in the 1996 budget speech he delivered in this House. Principles that he outlined for responsible budgeting that this government has utterly failed to heed. And because the government failed to heed the warning on page 25 of Budget 2022's budget document, because the government failed to heed the warnings of former Finance Minister Paul Martin, the economy continued to falter. A year later, in 2023, on April 17th, 2023, Jonathan Delorier and Robert Gagne at the Centre on Productivity and Prosperity at the Walter Somers Foundation did an analysis of Canada's living standards. Here's what they concluded, and I'd like to quote again. In 1981, Canadians enjoyed a $3,000 higher per capita standard of living than the major Western economies adjusted for inflation and currency fluctuations. 40 years later, Canada was $5,000 below that same average. If the trajectory continues, the gap will be nearly $18,000 by 2060. Canada's Department of Finance has also reported these alarming projections. Madam Speaker, according to their analysis on the current track that this government has put Canada on, we will go from having the 6th highest living standard in the leading OECD 19 economies in 1981 to dropping to 15th place. All the while, our closest trading partner and ally, the United States, ranks at 3rd place with the 3rd highest standard of living in the group. And subsequent to that analysis in policy options, many other experts rang the alarm bell about Canada's faltering economy. People like the former governor of the Bank of Canada, David Dodge, former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley, and former Policy and Budget Director to Finance Minister Bill Morneau, Robert Asselin. And yet, despite all the warnings from experts, coming from experts across the country in academia, in political circles, in policy circles, the government failed to heed the warnings. This year, the senior deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, added to these warnings. She said this about Canada's economy on March 26th of this year. She noted that productivity improved in the U.S. economy coming out of the pandemic, but that had not happened in Canada. quite the opposite. She noted that Canada's productivity is unchanged from where it was 7 years ago. In fact, she issued this very stark warning, quote, "You've seen those signs that say, 'In emergency, break glass.' Well, it's time to break the glass," end quote. This is very strong language coming from a central banker. Canada's central bank is saying publicly that we are in an economic emergency. They are using the word emergency. They are saying that Canada is falling behind other countries because of weak business investment, a lack of competition, and a failure to integrate new immigrants into the workforce. All responsibilities of this government. A couple of months later, on May 6, 2024, the Financial Times of London did an analysis itself, titled "A Warning from the Breakdown Nations." Here's what their analysis concluded. Quote, "Take Canada first. Widely admired for how it weathered the global financial crisis of 2008, it missed the boat when the world moved on, driven by big tech instead of commodities. Canada's per capita GDP has been shrinking 0.4% a year since 2020, the worst rate for any developed economy in the top 50. New investment and job growth is being driven mainly by the government." Madam Speaker, they go on to say, "Private sector action is confined largely to the property market, which does little for productivity and prosperity. Many young people can't afford to buy in one of the world's most expensive housing markets. Pressed to name a digital success, Canadian site Shopify, but the online store is the only tech name amongst the country's largest 10 companies, and its shares are trading at half their 2021 peak." That's the end of their analysis. On September 30th of this year, The Economist published an analysis titled, Why has Canada gone from being slightly richer than Montana, America's 9th poorest state, to being a bit worse off than Alabama, the 4th poorest? And a couple weeks later, The Economist also published a very, I would say, harsh but accurate assessment of the Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, do I have any time left, or I don't? Okay. I'll just finish by saying this. The government has put Canada in a very poor position, unable to meet the challenges of the new administration south of the border.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Prime Minister, Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I find it amazing that you get Conservatives that truly want to believe that they're in a better position to be able to negotiate a trade agreement when they were the first to capitulate the last go-around with President Trump. And, you know, as much as the member opposite tries to give the false impression that Canada is broken, when it comes to foreign investment, Madam Speaker, where people are placing their money, well, on a per capita basis, Canada was number 1 in the G7 and number 3 in the world. This government has generated over double the number of jobs that Stephen Harper did in the same time span, and that was attributed in good part to the record number of trade agreements that this government has signed off on, Madam Speaker, far outnumber the number of trade agreements with the Conservatives. Why should Canadians believe that the Conservatives have a chance at debating or negotiating a fair deal for Canadians when they've demonstrated capitulation?
Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member for the question, but he's utterly wrong. Here's an analysis from National Bank Financial by Matthew Arsenault and Alexandre Ducharme just from several weeks ago, and I quote, "Consequently, GDP per capita has fallen by about 4% cumulatively since 2022, which is unprecedented outside a recession." And speaking of investments, let me quote the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, who was in front of Finance Committee about a month ago, and here's what he said about investment in the Canadian economy, quote, "Foreign capital, even some Canadian capital, is going to the United States because they can get faster regulatory approvals. The fact of the matter is that this government has driven out investment out of this country, and as a result has driven down productivity, driven down per capita GDP, and made Canadians a lot poorer, in this country a lot more vulnerable to an incoming new administration.
That's right.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for La Salle-Verdun. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened to this speech by my honourable colleague, very focused on productivity and the productivity of the Canadian economy, which is a subject that is of concern to us all. What, in his opinion, are the industrial policies that should be implemented by Canada to resolve the issue of productivity?
Halton Hills?
Je veux dire merci.
I would say thank you to my honourable colleague for the question. I note that it is the former riding of he comes from the former riding of Paul Martin. In my answer, I would say that it is clear we need to attract domestic and international investment to the Canadian economy, and that starts with cutting taxes and taxes on investment. And the government is doing exactly the opposite with the capital gains tax, which diminishes investments here by Canadians in our economy, but also investments overseas investments here in Canada.
For Skinnamallock Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Wellington, Halton Hills, for his speech. The United States is likely under President-elect Trump to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, as he did in his first term. And this is something that will have severe implications for trade. And my question through you to him is whether he feels Canada should maintain its commitment to the Paris Agreement, particularly in light of the fact that other markets like the European Union are increasingly considering climate commitments as part of their trade relations.
The honourable for Wellington Halton Hills has 50 seconds to respond.
15?
50.
Oh, 50 seconds. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for the question. I think it's really important for Canada to ensure that our approach to climate change is integrated with that of the United States. Our economies are integrated, from autos to food manufacturing, from energy to services. And so we cannot have a regulatory environment here that is substantially different from that of the United States. And so I think it's really important that we ensure that there's a redoubling of our efforts on regulatory synchronization between the two countries. It's an initiative that was started under former Prime Minister Stephen Harper that was largely abandoned by the current government. I note that the Minister has recently resurrected the initiative, but it seems to me to have been too late in doing that.
Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Scarborough-Côte-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to speak this evening on a primordial issue. A number of yellow flags have been raised, whether it's by the NATO members, by the defense industry, or others. It was a big red flag that was raised by our main defense partner, the United States of America. Now the American administration has had enough. It has enough about potential threats coming from Canada for the safety of their citizens. Canada is always trying to avoid paying its fair share on its military obligations, and it seems to regret not working with serious partners. So all of the gaffes made by the Prime Minister have meant that it has had enough. On this side of the House, we have raised these issues with the Prime Minister on many occasions, but perhaps this time he will take action. There are many examples I could cite to demonstrate how incompetent this Prime Minister and his ministers have been, and I will focus on the disasters at national defense. Now, where do I start? We have been reproaching the Liberals on the defense file, but the Prime Minister keeps pushing back funding and pushing back equipment purchases. The Liberals have changed the rules of the game on defense spending. According to the PBO, declared defense spending increased by roughly $7 billion compared to the previous fiscal year, but that is attributable to the more flexible directives on what it constitutes defense spending, and they include measures that were not considered defense spending before, like benefits to veterans, funding for the Coast Guard, IT for national defense. Those are now included in the calculation by Canada for NATO. In other words, the Liberals have created $7 billion in new spending, but if you can compare this government spending with the Harper government spending, you're comparing apples and oranges. They are not meeting their two investment commitments to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense spending, and to spend more on research and development. The Liberals reduced by the armed forces budget by $2 billion, despite their promises not to do so. Budget 2024 specifically exempted the Canadian Armed Forces from the government spending review. So let's recall in 2023, the president of the Treasury Board, who was Minister of the National Defense at the time, asked all departments to start doing a spending review to look at cuts, but there was an exemption for the Canadian Armed Forces. Despite that, $1 billion was cut from D&D. The former Chief of Defense Staff said, and I quote, "It is impossible to withdraw nearly $1 billion from the budget without it having an impact. That is an issue we are facing currently." I had a very difficult session this afternoon with the commanders of the various services when we're trying to explain this to our people. Our people see the security situation degrading around the world, and trying to explain that to them is very difficult. End of quote. According to public accounts, the Liberals have set aside millions of defense spending. Point of order, the Honourable Member for Jonquière. I have a lot of affection for my colleague from Charlevoix-Haute-Saint-Charles, and I appreciate him very much. And now I'm wondering, we're supposed to talk about tariffs, and he's talking about national defense. And because I am a humble being, I'd like to understand the link between the two. And I'm sure my colleague from Charlevoix and Haute-Saint can tell me what the link is. There is some latitude in the speeches, but it needs to be tied to the discussion before the House. So I'm certain that the honourable member will remind us of the link between his speech and the motion before the House, the honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Because if my colleague from Jonquière was following what is happening currently, the reason why the new president of the United States is threatening to impose 25% tariffs on Canada is because it is related to management of the border and national defense, and Canada is an important issue with the Americans. So that is creating friction, and that is why, given the situation of the Canadian Armed Forces versus our partnerships with the Americans, and that is simply what is part of national security as a whole, and that is what they're currently reproaching Canada for. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, if my colleague from Jonquière would like to listen to me, I will continue in the time that remains to me. So according to public accounts, the Liberals carried over millions of dollars in dispense since 2015, and that means that because of their poor management, they were not able to spend the money allocated for national defense. According 58% of the Canadian Armed Forces are able to respond to in the event of a crisis, and nearly the half of the military equipment is considered as unavailable and unusable, and that is a reason why the American president is fed up. Do you see how it ties together, Madam Speaker? The Liberals finally said that they would replace the CF-18s, but that is after a number of years of bad management and political interference, and that has annoyed the Americans. And according to the Macdonald Laurier Institute, it is a catastrophic situation. they said, we've taken our obligations seriously. We rapidly acquired 5 C-17 transporter aircraft, Hercules aircrafts, Chinooks, Leopards, and we modernized frigates and so on and so forth. That pleased our American colleagues because we were with them in Afghanistan to fight against the Taliban, and that's what we did in our time in power. Andrew Leslie said, and I quote, and I would remind him that he was a Liberal MP who did not run again. Mr. Leslie said, during the last decade, the Liberals spent more money on consultants and professional services than on the Canadian Armed Forces, the Navy, and the Air Force altogether. So we have fewer employees. We're the only country where our operational readiness is dropping, whereas others is exploding. We are the least effective in NATO of all of the member states. We are the only country in NATO that doesn't have a costed number to reach the costed plan to reach the 2% of GDP, and I could go on. We are the only country in NATO which has publicly admitted that it has been not able to convince cabinet colleagues of the importance of national defense and of achieving the 2% of GDP objective. It's on the limits of atrocity. That is what Mark Norman said at the time about the state of the armed forces. He said that our preparation is to measure the capacity of armed forces to do what they are supposed to do. And we need to go to fight. And it's a situation that is quite disastrous and we're not where we should be. That's what Mark Norman said. And you need to prepare for combat. You always need to be ready to be deployed at any time. And that is not the situation currently. We're not there. The Liberal government has been catastrophic on national defense, and Canadian Armed Forces members have not had a guide for 10 years. And as we said at the time, when the situation changed, it was order against disorder. And now it's disorder. We want to put Canada back at the forefront, and so we need a plan. Where is the plan? That's the question. Questions and comments?
House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The members spoke in regards to the percentage of the GDP. And I can tell the member the last 4 years in which Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister, the highest percentage of the GDP is actually lower than our lowest amount of spending on the percentage of the GDP. In fact, Madam Speaker, the Conservatives were so bad under the leader of the Conservative Party today that they were actually less than 1%, Madam Speaker. Less than 1%. And now the Conservatives want to come across as if they believe in investing in their military and Canadian forces? That's a joke. All one needs to do is take a look at their last 4 years in government, Madam Speaker. Does he not recognize the hypocrisy of the leader of the Conservative Party in his position on that issue alone?
Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Madam Speaker, if the member across the way listened to what I was saying carefully, he would have noticed the difference between numbers from today and numbers from back in the day. Well, in the meantime, the rules have changed. NATO has now allowed countries to include the Coast Guard, Veterans Affairs, IT expenditure of the department. So the $7 billion that goes into this spending all of a sudden got included into the percentage of the GDP to be reached. And now the Liberals are saying, look, we're doing more than the Conservatives. Yes. Of course, I mean, there was a lot of other expenditure that's now been included into that package. But in 2023, they cut $1 billion in the budget, and the president of the Treasury Board was saying they wouldn't touch the armed forces. So they went up to 7, but then cut. So he's not being reasonable. Questions and comments. Honourable Member for La Salle-Verdun. Madam Speaker, 60 years ago, Canadian thinker George Brown published his work, Lament for Nation. We are talking about tariffs, and conservatives seem to be wanting to do what Americans want us to do. Another member was referring to more integration. Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles is advocating for more expenditure for defense. MP for Thornhill echoed the remarks of President-elect of the U.S. and referred to border management. I am attached to Quebec's independence. That's my wish. My question for the member is, independence of Canada, is it important for him and for his colleagues? Honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. I will remain respectful because my colleague is new here, is practicing, and is having fun, but he has no idea how the Canadian and American forces function together. So maybe he might want to go back to his notes and see how the binational organization works, NORAD works, how the two countries are interconnected, and then NATO is all interconnected, and NATO is western flank of NATO, so we have geostrategical importance. We are working with our American partners. We cannot work independently, and so he will need to deal with the rest of Canada for the time being.
The honourable for New Westminster, Burnaby.
My colleague was talking about this order. I can talk about this order myself too. Harper capitulated on softwood lumber, and we lost $1 billion. We left it on the table to the Americans. In Quebec, in British Columbia, everywhere across the country. So we lost 200 plants of softwood lumber. So we have seen total capitulation from the Conservatives. And we cannot trust the Conservatives to negotiate in anything because their track record is terrible. So what do they have to say to the thousands of workers who lost their jobs because of what they did? Honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles, brief answer, please. Well, what I can tell my colleague is that his support to the Liberal government over the last 9 years has meant that we have doubled the country's debt. So what does he say to Canadians who are paying more for goods and services that cost more because inflation is up? Housing is up because of the inflationary measures of this government, supported by my colleague and his party. Thank you.
Member for Kings Hants.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a privilege to be able to be here tonight to talk on a really important subject, which is the proposal that the President-elect of the United States has put out, at least publicly, the concept of 25% tariff on Canadian products into the United States. Before I start my remarks, I'd like to recognize, of course, I will have a 20-minute slot, but I would like to recognize the regrets here in the House of my honourable colleague from Etobicoke Lakeshore, someone who has deep relationships in the United States. I'm fortunate to be able to take his time this evening, but he did want to recognize that he wished he could be here for the debate. He's someone that has a presence
in the chamber and who's not. So I just wanted to remind him that, the honourable member for Kings Hants.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'd like to say that the honourable member from Lakeshore is a great member of Parliament and a good friend to the Canada-US relationship. Madam Speaker, I would be remiss without starting to recognize the fact that we did have an election tonight in Nova Scotia. Tim Houston, who as the Premier going into the election was re-elected with a majority mandate, and I'd like to congratulate him on his successful election. I'd also like to congratulate Zach Churchill, the leader of the Liberal Party, and also Claudia Chender, and all the candidates who put their name forward in Nova Scotia. I think we as elected members of Parliament in this place can certainly respect and understand the importance of people putting their name forward for democracy. So look forward to working with all the newly elected and re-elected members of the Legislative Assembly in Nova Scotia, in Kings Hants, and across Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, this is a crucial debate, and obviously any concept of tariffs on the most integrated economies in the world, I think is problematic. Because the proposal would not only hurt the Canadian economy, it would hurt the American economy and consumers on both sides of the border. Now, we don't have a whole lot to work with as parliamentarians, as has been reported and has been put out by the President-elect on his social media channels. He has alluded to the fact that in his first day of office, once assuming it on January 20th, he would put a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports into the United States. It is worth noting, Madam Speaker, that the Canada-U.S. relationship, I think, is one of the most unique in the world, in the sense that we share the longest undefended border in the world, and we have nearly $3 billion of products and services traded between our two countries on any given day. That represents nearly $1 trillion of trade. There is no country in the world that matches that reality. And as I saw the President-elect's remarks, look, we, I think, as Canadian parliamentarians want to work with the incoming administration. The Republican Party and President Trump were elected in the United States, but at the same time, we need to be able to find a pathway to be able to work with that new administration and understand how we can be able to get to an outcome that is going to be satisfactory for citizens on both sides of the border, because it should be in the vested interest of any parliamentarian or any member of Congress to be able to get that outcome. We serve the people, we serve our citizens here in Canada, and this is extremely important. And so obviously the debate tonight is a debate about presumably the impact of what these tariffs would represent, but also how the Government of Canada respond, but I would argue how members of Parliament in this House should respond, because yes, the government has a responsibility, but so too do we, every elected member of a Canadian constituency, to be able to represent Canada's interest and, of course, be the voice for our people here in Parliament. So I want to break my remarks down tonight, Madam Speaker, into a few different categories. I want to start about and talk about the economic relationship, but I also want to talk about defense and national security. I want to talk about a North American and continental approach. And I also want to talk about a Team Canada approach and how we should go about this relationship over the next couple months. But I'll start with the economy. I believe it to be there is 32 states of 50 in the United States whose most important trading partner is Canada. I'll repeat that, Madam Speaker. 32 of 50 states, that would be 64% of the United States, their most important trading partner is Canada. And it is because of that deep economic relationship that we have. In fact, in Canada, 75% of our exports, whether in goods or in services, go to the United States. We as a government and many successive federal governments have looked at diversifying trade. That is a good thing. Of course, we want to partner around the world, but we can't get around the fact that we have one of the most advanced economies in the world right on our doorstep, that the relationships are integral and connected. And I think when we talk about a 25% tariff on Canadian products, I'm not suggesting the government should do this right away, but if there was no movement on this issue between now and January 20th, of course, any reasonable government in the country would have to respond at some point to protect our national interests. And that would just lead to impacts on both sides of the border about the business interests and the impacts on communities. We have been here before, Madam Speaker. This government has managed a rocky Canada-U.S. relationship. And look, throughout our history, since Confederation, since the Declaration of Independence, there has always been times throughout the relationship where those relations can be strained. But we know even in those times, Madam Speaker, the Canada-U.S. relationship must prevail because of the shared interests and values that we have between our two countries. The protection of freedom, of democracy and liberty, and promoting Western liberal democracy across the world. So I do think it will be incumbent on all members of Parliament in this place to engage with their congressional colleagues in Capitol Hill or on Capitol Hill to make sure that they are reminded about the importance of that economic relationship, that it is a two-way relationship, that it benefits Canada and the United States equally. I want to talk a little bit about the resources that Canada has, Madam Speaker, that can benefit the United States, because I do think we wake up every morning thinking about the United States and their importance in a continental relationship. The United States is one of the largest countries in the world, and certainly I think arguably the most powerful country in the world. maybe does not think about Canada in the same way that we think about it every morning. And when I think about the importance of critical minerals, not only on the reduction of emissions and in the context of climate change, but also in the context of defense and security, we possess the critical minerals that the United States needs. And the other critical mineral superpower in the world is China. And we know from the relationship and the way in which both Democratic nominee for President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump have approached this is a concern around China's influence in the world. Canada has the critical minerals that the United States needs. We have seen investments by the Department of Defense in Canada's north in partnership with Canadian companies alongside our government to make sure that we build a supply chain that will work in a North American context. A 25% tariff goes directly at the heart against this type of thinking and would not be helpful to the American interests across the United States. When we talk about energy, Canada is an energy superpower. We should be deeply proud of that, whether it be our oil and gas sector, or it also represents, whether it be in renewables and other forms of energy, nuclear energy also being a key opportunity to partner in deeper integration with the United States. The United States needs our energy market. And I had the opportunity at the Halifax International Security Forum, Madam Speaker, to have a conversation with a representative from Amazon. Of course, Amazon is looking at artificial intelligence. They're looking at deep data centers as a way to help drive their business, but also drive innovations that are going to be needed around the world. But they need renewable energy to do that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Canadians who are listening at home tonight, they would be proud to know that Canada is one of the best grids in the world from an electricity perspective. Nearly 86% of our electricity that is generated is emission-free. That leads the world, Madam Speaker. And yeah, it is a tremendous opportunity and a competitive advantage. So as American companies are looking to expand their footprint in the digital space, whether it be Quebec, British Columbia, or across this country, we are well positioned to be able to capitalize upon that. 25% tariffs don't help in that. And last, I would say about the integrated market. On any given day, whether it's a company in Kings Hants, Nova Scotia, whether it's in Etobicoke Lakeshore, whether it's in Surrey, British Columbia, we have companies that do business across border, and vice versa. There is great American companies that provide products and services that we need in this country. So we can't look at this from an and/or perspective. I listened to questions in the question period today, Madam Speaker, and I heard the Conservatives using the word Canada first. Well, look, any member of Parliament in this place, of course, wants to place Canadian national interests at the top of what we advocate for every day. But that type of thinking plays into an isolationist type of view that I don't think is actually beneficial when we're talking about the Canada-US relationship. We have to be talking about partnership. So every time the Conservatives stand in this place and talk about Canada first, no, we should be talking about North American advantage and how Canada can cooperate. That puts Canadian interests at the heart of what we're doing alongside the Americans in a global context. So I want to talk about that in an economic sense. But we do need to talk about defense and national security. Madam Speaker, I submit to you that the world is probably the most dangerous it has been in the last 100 years. We have war in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, provoked by Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation. We have war in the Middle East, and I was pleased to see a ceasefire today between Israel and Hezbollah. That is important news, but again, there remains stability in that region. And we have a rise of authoritarian governments around the world. Again, I bring you back to my experience at the Halifax International Security Forum. One of the panels this weekend in Halifax was called the CRINCs: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and their involvement in the world. They are not out to protect and promote democratic values, Madam Speaker. They are out to do the opposite. And Canada has an interesting role to play in the world here, Madam Speaker. We have to promote the ability for Western liberal democracies to succeed in this challenge that we're facing, which is the most, again, dangerous world we've seen in 100 years. So that bears upon a responsibility for Canada and the United States to take a leadership role in the world. And the way we do that is by working together. It is not by putting up walls or tariff barriers between us. It's by looking at ways that we can further integrate our economies and the ways that we can cooperate in interests of national security. Now, I fully support the fact, I think it took a little bit too long, Madam Speaker, but I support the fact that the government has committed to a 2% target on NATO. It is going to require billions of dollars between now and 2032 to scale up to that amount. The member from Etobicoke Lakeshore and I were in Washington in July as part of the NATO conference, and we had these conversations alongside congressional leaders in the House and in the Senate about the ways that Canada can be a key partner in NATO. You know what's concerning, Madam Speaker? And I heard the shadow critic for defense today stand up in the House. First time I've seen him in a long time that the leader of the official opposition allowed him to speak in this place. And he asked questions on defense. The Conservatives love to beat their chest on the defense question. They had defense spending under 1% when they left office in 2015, and they have not yet committed to the 2% target. So my question to my honourable colleagues on the other side of the House, when will you formally commit to the 2% and help work and push this government to do more on defense spending? Because not only is it a moral imperative in the world that we're facing right now, it is going to be an extremely important element in terms of that relationship with the United States. When we talk to Republican congressional leaders, they will be engaging with the President-elect about the importance of U.S. influence in foreign policy, but they will be saying NATO countries have to step up and deliver sooner on their commitments. This government is starting on that path. The opposition should be joining us and saying they fully commit to 2%, but you don't hear a lick out of them in relation to foreign policy. They don't talk about it, Madam Speaker. They do not talk about their view in the world, and I think it would be incumbent on them, if they think they're a government in waiting, they should probably start talking about how they would view the world and Canada's role in the world, particularly as it relates to defense. Madam Speaker, I want to take a moment. How much time do I have left, Madam Speaker? About 6 minutes, 7 minutes? Okay. I just want to take an opportunity to talk about the Team Canada approach. This is extremely important, and we saw the premiers write to the Prime Minister and talk about the importance of bringing the premiers of the provinces and the territories together. We have to be united as a Team Canada approach. I know we can have partisan debates in here. I just took a bit of a shot at the Conservatives on the opposite side, but I do so in good faith, hoping and knowing that at the end of the day, Canada's interests should come ahead of any partisan interest in this place. And we are in a critical moment, Madam Speaker, and I do think it is incumbent on the government, to the extent that they can find goodwill across this House, to be able to build a consensus, to be able to go to Washington and make sure that we are advocating for Canada's interests as a united Team Canada, alongside the premiers. And I think that that should include the provinces. We've seen Premier Ford and we've seen Premier Wab Kinew and Danielle Smith talk about their desire to want to get to Washington and get to Capitol Hill. That is important, and I think Canada is a big federation. We have regional interests that may differ, or there may be particular strategic assets, depending if you're in the Atlantic or if you're in British Columbia, the West, Ontario, Quebec. That may differ about how you want to engage in this relationship, but we have to do it in an aligned approach. I do think it's incumbent on all members of Parliament. We should be thinking about our work, our ability to travel to Capitol Hill and to engage constructively with our American colleagues in Congress about the ways that we can work together. We need to build those relationships, Madam Speaker. It's a muscle memory. We need to be able to spend time on Capitol Hill. Some of us do this very well. Others maybe have never actually taken the opportunity to go to Washington. It is important that we are doing that and inviting our American colleagues to come here to Ottawa so that we can reinforce the partnership that we have together. Last is on industry and key stakeholders. This is going to be important. The business relationship cross-border needs to be reinforced, and we have to find symmetry on ways that we can create wins for industry in the United States, but also in Canada. I believe, Madam Speaker, there is a window and a great opportunity to do more of that, and I think we should view this relationship not as a contentious one or one that is a threat to Canada. I know a 25% opening conversation on tariffs is problematic, but we should view this as an opportunity about how we can further deepen the relationship and build wins on both sides of the border. Madam Speaker, it would be irresponsible of me not to talk about the agriculture question. I chair the House of Commons Agriculture Committee, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the cross-border wins that I just alluded to. I do think we need to be identifying harmonization of policies that are wins for our Canadian agriculture sector and the U.S. sector as well. I want to give you one, which is Bill C-280. It is in the House. I'm deeply disappointed that the Senate has amended the bill, notwithstanding it was voted on 323 to 1 in this place. It will be coming back to this House. I would ask this House to reject that amendment, but furthermore, if this bill is going to be delayed, I think it is absolutely responsible for the government to take the bill, I think it's from the member from Simcoe North, take the contents of the bill and put it in some type of economic legislation. Now, we are mired in a question of privilege where there is a block here in the House, but there is important legislation that we have to get through for the Canada-U.S. relationship and for Canadians. C-280 would be one of those. I think about opportunities around the Pest Management Regulatory Agency and the EPA and ways that they can share information to be able to drive questions around crop management and crop protection products and approvals. That is easy wins that I presume a Republican administration would see as straightforward policy that we could also sell on our side of the border. I think about the ability to align on the standardization around standards and what products are actually marketed under. That's something we could align in a North American context. Also around wilderness protection. The United States, regardless if you're a Democrat or a Republican, they are big on protecting nature and natural lands. We, I think, can also find bipartisan or multi-partisan consensus here in Canada around protecting natural landscapes. Those are things that we could do together in alignment in an international context. But, Madam Speaker, I know I only have about a minute left. I do want to talk about Nova Scotia just quickly. I think we are fortunate to be exempted from the forestry tariffs that have been discussed in this House. I do think we need to, as an entire Parliament, continue to lean in on that question. The forestry sector matters to this country, and we should be there. The President-elect mentioned two things in his post yesterday, fentanyl and the border. I would hazard to guess that any member of Parliament in this place wants to tackle the question of fentanyl and the impact of drug abuse in this country. We are all standing there, and I think that the government can do more, and certainly on the border and any immigration mechanisms, we can be there to make sure we give confidence to the incoming administration that by no means should there be a 25% tariff on our products. Not only would it hurt American industry, but we can work with this incoming administration to make sure that we have partnership. I see I'm coming to the end of my time. I look forward to taking questions from my honourable colleagues. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable for Dufferin-Caledon.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's interesting that the member talked about the border and said there's nothing to see here, everything's great. I was listening to a CBS News report from about a week ago talking about the border, 295 miles of border between Canada and the United States, which includes New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. In 2023, 19,000 illegals were captured crossing that border. 321 were on the United States terror watch list. This is exactly the problem. This government has been so incompetent in managing our borders. This is why we're in the situation we are. I wonder if the member wants to comment on that failure.
The honourable member King's Hands.
I'd like to comment, Madam Speaker, and I have the privilege of having the Minister of Public Safety in my Atlantic caucus. So we talked about this explicitly. When the member talks about 19,000 cases, what he's talking about is incidences. So that could be an individual who shows up at the American border forgetting their passport. That counts as an incident. So when he uses that number of 19,000, it is somewhat misleading. He mentions the number. There are problems, and we do need to make sure that we're addressing this. The Minister of Public Safety has addressed this in the House. But when he uses the number 19,000, it is a bit misleading to this House because it relates to any incidents, including a Canadian who just showed up to the border in Calais who wants to go, in St. John, who wants to go into Calais who forget their passport. So he should be careful in using those numbers accordingly.
Questions and order. The honourable member had an opportunity to ask a question. If he has others, he should wait till the appropriate time to make it further comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable
The honourable member for La Salle Aymar Verdun. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened to my colleague across the way talk about the bill, but there's another bill that I'd like to hear his opinion on. It's which is 282, C282, which has to do with egg supply management. Now, this is something that would defend the interests of Quebec farmers. I'd like to know from my colleague if his government will force the senators to respect the will of this chamber. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his questions. And I'd like to also welcome him because I think this is the first time I have interacted with him following the by-election. So I thank him for his question. I think we know how important supply management is in Quebec, also in Nova Scotia. It's very important, but I agree with farmers on supply management. Supply management is important all over Canada, not only in Quebec, but of course it's important there. And it's necessary, absolutely necessary for all parliamentarians to protect this sector. And yes, I supported that bill. And if the Senate does not accept it, I think it's very important for all, for the committee to reject its amendment. Now, I hope that the Bloc Québécois will support our situation in Parliament because things have been blocked just in the Senate, just as they've been blocked with the question of privilege.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and once again, a big happy birthday to you. I'm sorry that you're here so late with us all tonight on your birthday. Madam Speaker, thank you to the member from Kings Hunts. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And I'm sure that the member is just as excited as I am to hear the news of the provincial election that we have the first woman leader of the opposition elected in Nova Scotia, wow. Claudia Chender. So this is very exciting news. Madam Speaker, I'm certain the member, being from Nova Scotia, loves lobster just as much as I do and the people who catch it. And do you know who else loves lobster? People around the world, including in the United States. The lobster that was caught in Nova Scotia just last year, so there's 51,000 tons of lobster valued at more than $1 billion last year, wow. And 60% of that was exported into the United States. And so my question to the member is, how is he supporting these local lobster fishers to ensure that they can continue to do so and that we see the benefits of this lobster going back into Canada now, in particular in light of these tariffs being promised by Trump? How are we preparing to make sure that we're supporting these lobsters?
Speaker, let me start by wishing you a happy birthday, and I can't think of any greater privilege that you have than being here at the heart of democracy in this country, so happy birthday to you. To my honourable colleague, look, yes, very proud of the fact of all our provincial leaders, whether it be Zach Churchill, obviously Claudia Chender ran a tremendous campaign, I think the world of her as well, and I would like to congratulate the Premier-elect, Mr. Houston. On lobsters, yes, the seafood industry is absolutely crucial to Atlantic Canada, to Nova Scotia, but I also think about industries like Michelin and the tire industry and the interconnected nature that they have. This would also disrupt those types of economies. So the member asked me what I'm doing personally. Well, I'm planning on going down to Capitol Hill in January. I have meetings lined up with Republican congressional leaders, and I think that she should do the same along with every member of this House to make sure that we are doing our part to sell a Team Canada approach to protect our national interests and promote economic cooperation in the continent. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable for Surrey Newton.
I wish you a very happy birthday. Madam Speaker, the honourable member from King's Hands brought in an exceptional idea of a Team Canada perspective. And I remember, Madam Speaker, I was on the International Trade Committee when we finalized the CUSMA, including the Conservative member from St. Albert, Saskatchewan. And we all worked together from Seattle all the way to Washington, D.C., meeting business people, trades, unions, you name it, to convince them that there should be a strong relationship. And I want to thank him for that idea. But on the other hand, I see conservatives are using scare tactics that there will be a lot of flow of illegal migrants to Canada. If the member can tell how our government is prepared to deal with that situation if it arises, the ones that conservatives are trying to scare people off.
For King's Hands.
Madam Speaker, I'll take 30 seconds to respond, and then I'll try to move a unanimous consent motion. What I would say is the border is an important element. We've heard the Minister of Immigration talk about the measures that the government is taking. We will be there to help support. I don't think it is important for any member of Parliament. I don't think it is responsible for them to be suggesting that we have a porous border, that we're not there to help support. We will be there as a government to maintain our borders alongside the United States, and we'll also be willing to tackle that question of fentanyl. While I have the floor, Madam Speaker, our honourable colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands, who does great work in this House, she wanted to ask a question. I would ask unanimous consent that we allow for an additional 30 seconds for her to ask and 30 seconds for me to respond.
For another question. So the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and to my honourable colleague from King's Hands. What I wanted to ask, and I was for the debate tonight, the leader of the official opposition referred to the president-elect as the president, as though the tariffs had been announced by a president with power to enact tariffs immediately. I applaud the member for King's Hands for saying he's going to be going to Washington, meeting with colleagues. I think we all should be trying to find, and we should be asking all parties in this House, all members of Parliament in this House with contacts, friends in the U.S. Congress, and in any influential position to work with us. This is not the President of the United States. Donald Trump is President-elect. He will be inaugurated on January 20th, and I'd ask him if he doesn't agree. It would have been better if the leader of the official opposition had recognized that we could work together across party lines and get down to the U.S. to make sure they understand tariffs hurt them too.
Member, a brief answer, because he used up some of the time a while ago trying to move this motion. So the honourable member for King's Hands.
Got some cupcakes out back for you, Madam Speaker, on your birthday. I hope you'll give me a few extra seconds. What I want to say is the member from Saanich Gulf Islands, I think, says it best. When I listened in the House and the Conservatives were saying that they would take a combative approach, that they, quote-unquote, want to use Canada first, I don't know what that language means, and I think it is incumbent on all of us in this House to use our relationship beyond politics, to be able to say now is the time to promote Canadian interests in the United States, to promote continental unity and ability to find common ground, even if we don't always agree on everything, so that we can protect Canadian interests and continental security. I certainly applaud the maturity of the member from Saanich Gulf Islands to point that out, notwithstanding the member from Carleton's remarks earlier today. Thank you, Madam.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be sharing my time with my colleague, the member for Dufferin-Caledon. Madam Speaker, today I speak with great concern for the future of our economy, especially for key sectors, aluminum and softwood lumber, which are essential to Quebec's prosperity. These industries support thousands of families and workers in Quebec, but they are today threatened due to the incompetence of the Prime Minister. The aluminum industry, which produces 30% of the world's aluminum, is now vulnerable because of unfair competition, especially because of low-price Chinese aluminum. Quebec producers, which invests in clean production, are threatened by this unfair competition. And also the softwood lumber industry, which is worth $12 billion for the Canadian economy, may have to deal with tariffs imposed by the United States. Yesterday, the president-elect, Mr. Trump, talked about intending to slap tariffs of 25% on Canadian products, which would directly affect aluminum and softwood lumber. I'd like to ask the honourable member if he could be careful, because he's placing his papers near the microphone, and that can be an issue for interpreters. Thank you. Even it's same thing if it's the microphone beside him. The honourable member. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Say this would affect the aluminum industry, and also softwood lumber. It would increase production costs. It would make us less competitive and would threaten all kinds of jobs in Quebec. And yet, the federal government has yet to implement concrete measures to protect our people. What is even more shocking is that this was all predictable. President Trump evoked this, the possibility of 25% tariffs on Canadian products. He's done so for years, and especially during his election campaign. The Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister were caught short. A few days ago, the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister said that Canada would manage. But neither she nor the Prime Minister were really following what Trump had been saying for years. This is the manifest incompetence of this government. This government seems unable to defend our economic interests and is making our industries increasingly fragile. What the Liberals seem to do best is to weaken our economy. We saw it this summer with the threat of bringing in an order against forestry to protect caribou. So this order would protect caribou. It would also kill the forestry industry. The order that the Minister of the Environment wants to bring in would affect thousands of jobs in my area. I also have heard that a certain municipality which lives on this industry would be devastated if this order were to go forward. Quebecers have voted twice for this Prime Minister, and they've left him the possibility of devastating these regions. Recently, 3 lumber mills closed down in Quebec. Saint-Chamino in my region, leaving 100 workers unemployed. The reasons for this were the price of softwood lumber, and this is because of this government's inability to negotiate a softwood lumber accord and to protect forestry workers. And they should think carefully before coming up with these policies which harm Quebec.
9 years this government has been in power, and it has dealt with 3 different presidents and still no deal on softwood lumber. And the previous Prime Minister was able to do so in 90 days. And we must put an end to the carbon tax, which increases production costs and reduces competitiveness. This tax must be eliminated to allow our businesses to remain competitive on the international stage, particularly facing rivals who are subject to no similar constraints. It is also imperative to stop any tax increases on businesses and companies. They are facing significant challenges, and the fiscal burden only worsens them. We have Rio Tinto back home and a number of businesses that help the aluminum sector. It is threatened by Chinese products that are produced with no environmental standards and no protections for workers. My leader, unlike the Prime Minister, understands that aluminum is an economic motor. He visited Saguenay in this summer to talk about protecting Canadian aluminum. A common sense government will impose tariffs on Chinese aluminum to protect jobs in Saguenay and to protect the environment as well, because we have the cleanest aluminum. My region produces, as I said, it produces the cleanest aluminum in the world. Every ton of aluminum from Saguenay reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So we produce 2 tons of emissions per 1 ton. It's 14 in China. But tax increases on Canadian companies make our producers less innovative and slow innovation. We need the industry to be able to develop itself. We need to hire and continue to produce in Canada. The role of a government is to defend the interests of our workers and our industries. In the Liberal era, this government has shown time and time again that it is reactive and not proactive. Not only are we feeling the consequences of weak leadership, but they have also made decisions without consulting key sectors. Key industries like softwood lumber and aluminum, they deserve a government that anticipates challenges, that confronts them firmly and protects our jobs, our families, and our economic livelihood. But above and beyond these economic issues, it is obvious that the weakness of the Liberal government on the management of our border and the security of our country has contributed to the threat by Donald Trump to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian products. The Conservatives have always focused on concrete measures to secure our borders and fight against these threats while protecting our economy. Our industrial sectors, vital sectors like softwood lumber and aluminum, deserve a government that will protect the competitiveness of Canadian companies. We must rise up to defend our workers and businesses in the face of these external threats. The time has come, Madam Speaker, to put an end to the Liberal inaction and to take concrete measures to ensure the prosperity of Quebecers and all Canadians. Canada first. It is time, Madam Speaker, for elections. Thank you. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government.
Point of order, the honourable member for Halton, Wellington, or yes. Wellington.
Yeah, just a quick point of order. I misquoted the Economist title, so just I'd like the Hansard corrected so that the correct title of the article is in Hansard. And the title of the article, dated September 30th, 2024, was, quote, "Why is Canada's economy falling behind America's? The country was slightly richer than Montana in 2019. Now it is just poorer than Alabama," end quote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm sure that the honourable member's record will be corrected. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, in just listening to many of the Conservatives talk about the issue of trade, it does raise the issue in terms of, I truly believe, as we've witnessed previously under the round one of trade negotiations with United States, that it wasn't that much pressure, but the Conservatives capitulated and, in essence, said, doesn't matter, give them whatever they want in order to sign off on a trade agreement. The government disagreed, and we continued to have those discussions, and ultimately were able to deliver a much more substantive trade agreement with the United States as a direct result. We didn't have to capitulate like the leader of the Conservative Party wanted us to. My question to the member is, why does he believe that his leader wouldn't do the same thing that he did a few years ago and just capitulate and give whatever it is the United States wants in order to sign off on an agreement when we have demonstrated that we've...
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Thank you to my colleague for the question. What I'm concerned about with this government is the credibility of our Prime Minister in the face of Prime Minister Trump, or President Trump. We're very concerned that the credibility isn't there, and also the way the Prime Minister negotiates. It seems like he's always late to the party, and he's always reacting on a number of files, including CUSMA that was negotiated. The Americans were negotiating with Mexico, and then we hopped on board. So I think our leader knows where he's going, he knows how to make decisions, and he's showing good leadership. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would simply like to correct a few errors by my colleague. First of all, thanks to the Bloc Québécois, there was a special committee on the woodland caribou, an environment committee. I hope that he will recognize that. And the second thing is that aluminum from Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean is particularly competitive because it is clean aluminum with low greenhouse gas emissions. So why wouldn't we put a tax on carbon? It would disadvantage us. It would disadvantage the aluminum foundries in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. So he's saying that they need to put an end to the carbon tax, but if they made aluminum from coal, they would think it's one great. On the one hand, he says we have the greenest aluminum, but we don't want a carbon tax. How are we competitive if we don't have a carbon tax? Please explain the situation to me. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleague for the question. It's not a bad question. But what strikes me when we talk about the forestry sector is that my colleague seems to really enjoy having conversations and sending press communiques. But when it's time to defend the forestry sector here in Canada, he's not at the table. He has meetings in the region, but he doesn't do it here in Ottawa. He's asked no questions to defend forestry sector workers. So I'm worried about the people in my region. He says that he supports them, but then here he doesn't. Well, I know my colleague's region very well, having lived in Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. And I learned French there, and it's a region that I really love, with a forestry sector that is very vital. Before the Harper regime cut in the forestry sector, not just in Chicoutimi-La-Fjord, but also in BC and elsewhere, we lost 100,000 jobs. We lost 200 softwood lumber mills. Unfortunately, because of the irresponsible actions of the Harper years. So I would like to know from my colleague, does he understand the realities of these irresponsible measures to capitulate on the softwood lumber file, and what does he have to say to the 100,000 workers who lost their jobs? It's not really a brief question, but please try for a brief answer. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Thank you to my colleague, who I respect a lot. But there's one thing that I don't understand about him, is that he's supported this government with its exorbitant expenses when food banks are full, people have difficulty making ends meet and paying their mortgage at the end of the month. And there's one thing, in 9 years of this government, no agreement on softwood lumber has been reached. With the former Conservative Prime Minister, he did it in 90 days. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So tonight we're having an emergency debate to discuss proposed 25% tariffs by the President-elect of the United States. So we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And the answer to that question is because the Liberals have so badly managed our relationship with the United States over the past 9 years. And I could speak for 2 or 3 hours about that, but I only have 10 minutes, so I'll only be able to address a few of these issues. The first one is softwood lumber. We've had a softwood lumber dispute unresolved by these Liberals for the last 9 years. As a result of this, we have lost tens of thousands of jobs in the forestry sector. Over $9 billion in duties have been collected by the United States. $9 billion that could have been used to invest in new equipment, new machinery, new sawmills, new technology, and new jobs for Canadian workers. Instead, what's happened is sawmills have closed, Canadian workers have lost their jobs, many of them unionized workers. These were good-paying jobs, and they've all gone down to the United States. Now, I understand why the United States is doing that, because they're trying to protect their workers. The question is, why has this Liberal Prime Minister repeatedly failed to protect Canadian workers? And that's just on softwood lumber. Those tariffs total on average, the countervailing and anti-dumping duties total about 15%, and it has wreaked havoc on Canadian workers. Now, the proposed tariff of 25%, you can only imagine what that would do to forestry workers from coast to coast to coast across Canada. So failure number one, and what they always say, Madam Speaker, the old saying is, you know, the sequel is always worse than the original. So the original failure by this government has been on softwood lumber. And let me tell you, it's a horror movie in of itself. But the sequels actually just keep getting worse. And the effect on Canadian workers. So it's bad enough that Canadians in general suffer the consequences of a Prime Minister who has incompetently managed the relationship with our largest trading partner. And let's remember, that accounts for 40% of our GDP, the trading relationship with the United States. It is the most important trading relationship that we have in Canada. And a Prime Minister really only has a few responsibilities, core responsibilities, one of which keep Canadians safe. We know this Prime Minister has miserably failed on this. Violent crime is surging. People are out on parole 5 minutes after they've committed a crime. That's been an abject failure. The other very important thing is to maintain the trading relationship with the United States. And once again, this Liberal Prime Minister has been an absolute failure and a disaster. So we start with softwood lumber, still not resolved 9 years later, tens of thousands of jobs lost, billions of dollars worth of tariffs collected to the detriment of Canadian workers and Canadian industry. So from there, we fast forward to 2018, where the United States under President Trump, then President Trump, imposed 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why did they impose those tariffs? Well, it's actually pretty interesting because it's about the border. So in 2018, it's about the border. In 2024, these proposed tariffs are about the border. History repeats itself when you have an incompetent government. So the 232 tariffs were actually because Chinese steel and aluminum were coming into Canada and being diverted down into the United States, taking away American jobs, taking away American steel production. And the Americans tried to warn us about this repeatedly. And I know this from my consultations with the steel and the aluminum industry. And they were asking for Canada to come up with a way to deal with this anti-circumvention methods of bringing Chinese steel in through Canada and flooding into the United States. And guess what? The incompetent Prime Minister, the incompetent Liberal government, did absolutely nothing despite repeated requests from the United States to clean up the border, and stop allowing the steel to come in. So they imposed punishing 232 tariffs on Canadian industries. And guess what? We lost jobs in our steel industry. We lost jobs in our aluminum industry. Now, I know what they'll say, oh, we brought tariffs against them, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole thing could have been avoided, Madam Speaker, if they weren't so incompetently managing the relationship with our largest trading partner. So because of how they behaved, the United States put punishing tariffs on our steel and aluminum industry, which caused all kinds of damage. Again, who are the ones that suffer from the Prime Minister's incompetence? It's not him. He continues to live his lavish lifestyle. But the workers, the unionized workers in particular, are the ones who suffer and lose their jobs when a Prime Minister so incompetently manages the largest trading relationship that we have in our economy. So that's the interesting thing, that the 2018 tariffs were about a border issue. You would think that even a government as incompetent as this Liberal government would realize maybe we should make sure we're taking care of our border with our largest trading partner. It's an irritant, right? But they don't. They just continue to bumble along and mismanage the relationship. So where do we end up? We end up with a situation now where there is the potential of punishing 25% tariffs being levied against all goods coming into the United States. This would have an unbelievably devastating effect on the Canadian economy. And one of the reasons, again, is the issues on the border. And before I spoke tonight, I had the opportunity to watch a news report from a CBS affiliate in the United States. And in that report, they talked about a 295 miles of border between Canada and the United States that encompasses New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And the number of arrests that are being made by the U.S. Border Services are skyrocketing. In 7,000 people entered the United States illegally and were arrested in 2023 from just this 295 miles of border. In 2024, according to the report that I watched tonight, that number is up to 19,000. Now, these are 19,000 arrests, not incidents. And according to the report as well, 321 of the people who were arrested out of those 19,000 were on a terror watch list. So they mismanaged the border with respect to steel and aluminum, allowing Chinese products to come in, resulting in punishing 232 tariffs being slapped on Canadian steel and aluminum, which resulted in economic devastation in those industries. There were jobs lost. Hard-working union members. I visited these members at steel plants across the country. They work hard. They lost their job because of government incompetence. And now they face the same reality because of how incompetently this Liberal government has mismanaged the relationship with our largest trading partner. So when we try and think about the effects of this, again, we have to think about the workers that are going to be affected. 93% of our auto manufacturing goes to the United States. 84% of our steel goes to the United States. When you look at unionized workers in the auto sector, the mining sector, forestry, oil and gas, 412,000 union jobs are at risk. I don't know what their approach is, Madam Speaker, other than incompetence, but we need a new approach. We need a Canada-first approach. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. And that's just it. You know, no government in the history of Canada has actually signed off on more trade agreements than this government. And that's just a fact, Madam Speaker. Now we're having to do a second Trump trade agreement. And when the Conservatives had a chance to contribute towards debate, the most recent one was between Canada and Ukraine. They voted against it. Every other political party voted in favor of it. Just the Conservatives voted against it. And when it came to the last United States trade agreement, they capitulated and want to give everything away. Why should Canadians trust this leader of the Conservative Party today when he's so easy to throw away what are important opportunities for Canadians? He is not putting Canada first, I would suggest.
Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
We voted against the Ukraine Free Trade Agreement because they tried to impose a carbon tax in a trade agreement for the first time ever. I read every trade agreement we have. Carbon pricing, carbon leakage isn't in a single one of them. They're trying to put a carbon tax in a trade agreement with a country at war. I think it was a terrible thing to do. That's why I voted against it. But on the renegotiation, I've read the book by the United States lead negotiator. The members should read it. And in it, he states this with respect to their great negotiating tactics. On August 27th, we finally had an arrangement with only a few hours to spare. Of course, at this stage, an important part of the cast was absent, the entire Canadian delegation. This is because of the deep freeze in U.S.-Canada relationships that went from June until August 22nd, when we signed a new United States-Mexico trade agreement. Canada wasn't at the table for 3 months of those negotiations because of the absolute and utter incompetence of this Liberal Prime Minister and government. The Americans said, here's the trade agreement, sign it or don't. If that's negotiating well, they need to go back to school.
Questions and comments? The honourable member Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you. To the honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon, I've been waiting a long time to ask this because I was really disturbed by this speech from his leader, the leader of the official opposition, who decided to, in the same way that the Conservatives said the Canada-Ukraine trade agreement was woke, decided to attack the commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, who has served this country for almost as long as his leader of the official opposition has been alive, who's worked, who served in Afghanistan, who's commanded naval destroyers. Vice Admiral Angus Topshee deserves an apology from the Conservative Party, and I wonder if the honourable member will be honourable enough to do that on the floor tonight.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
I don't even know what to make of that. It's not a question that's relevant to any of the debate tonight with respect to an emergency debate on proposed tariffs by President-elect Trump. The contribution to the Green Party in this debate is to talk about a comment about the wokeification of the military, which is actually a legitimate problem. It's one of the reasons why we are having such a difficult time actually attracting soldiers. This Liberal government has really destroyed proud military institutions in this country, and I'm disappointed that this is the member's contribution to the serious threat for workers' jobs in this country as a result of the mismanagement of the trade relationship. I would think that would be her question, other than to try to attack the next Prime Minister of this country.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if the member can provide his thoughts in regards to why it is that the leader of the Conservative Party was part of a cabinet with Stephen Harper that made serious, severe cuts to Canada border control, Madam Speaker. You're talking well over 1,000 jobs, millions of dollars, and then they wonder why it is that some of the problems occurred after that butchering of the department from the Conservative Party.
Answer from the Honourable for Dufferin-Caledon.
If only he knew someone in the government, if these alleged cuts took place, which of course they didn't, it cut bureaucracy, not frontline BSOs, but if only he knew someone in the government to fix if this problem existed. They've been the government for 9 years. They haven't figured out that there's a problem with the border. It's the epitome of why we are where we are, because this government is incompetent from top to bottom.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to be able to rise and speak to what is a very important issue for all Canadians in every region of our country, Madam Speaker. And I thought maybe a good way to start it off is to talk about the per capita foreign investment that we have witnessed in 2023, Madam Speaker, where we saw that Canada, on a per capita basis, was the #1 out of all the G7 countries. In fact, if you take a look at all the countries around the world, we actually placed #3. Why that is important, Madam Speaker, is because it speaks volumes in terms of where investors are looking to invest. And Canada is a prime destination for foreign international investment. One of the reasons for that, Madam Speaker, is because they see in Canada and in an environment that values trade. As I've indicated earlier, no government in the history of our nation has literally signed off on more trade agreements with other countries than this government. We understand the true value of international trade. And as the weeks and months go on, what we will be seeing is a great deal more discussion about trade between Canada and the United States because of the re-election of Donald Trump, Madam Speaker, to the office of President. And that will take effect, as members are very much aware, in January 2025. I would like to emphasize that when you take a look at the first round of negotiations, one needs to reflect on the role that the Conservatives played in opposition when the whole issue of trade discussions between Canada and the United States got a little tense. And the Conservatives and the leader...
Point of order, the honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
I apologize for interrupting the member. This is an extremely important debate about where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs depend. All the parties are here tonight, except the Conservatives don't have a single member of Parliament in the House. And I find that...
Sorry, the honourable member can't point as to who is in the House and who's not in the House, and I just want to remind the member of that. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Having said that, with regards to the point of order, I believe that the member is fair in his assessment. If the Conservatives truly believed in the issue in which they wanted to debate this evening as an emergency debate, one would think that they would be fully engaged, Madam Speaker, yet it's the absolute opposite. Having said that, we do take the issue seriously, and that's the reason why what I'm suggesting is we need to take into consideration how the Conservatives behaved in the last go-around, Madam Speaker. I am very much concerned about Canadian jobs and the impact that the negotiations and the ultimate renewed trade agreement, which will eventually have to come into being, Madam Speaker, if the Conservatives had their way, they've already demonstrated, in particular this leader, how quickly they are to capitulate and give the Americans whatever it is that they might desire in order to have a signed trade agreement. We have clearly demonstrated, on the other hand, through the last 9 years, that we do know how to get it done, that we do have the civil servants and the political will and desire to get trade agreements done, Madam Speaker. And for a very good reason. If I take a look at my home province of Manitoba, and I think of exports, you can talk about things maybe not as well known, such as pharmaceuticals. Manitoba exports a lot of pharmaceuticals, Madam Speaker. We can talk about wheat and canola, pork and potatoes, agricultural machinery, our mining industry, leading bus manufacturer in North America, Madam Speaker. In fact, I can recall reading press statements about buses being sold to New York and many other states in the U.S., Madam Speaker. These are the types of things that generate real, tangible jobs. Let me give you an example of that. Take a look at Manitoba's pork industry, an industry in which I've talked a great deal about in the past. Because I think it's a great example, Madam Speaker. There are literally thousands of direct jobs, people that are actually working on hog farms to processing plants, whether it's High Life in Neepawa, Maple Leaf in Brandon, or in the city of Winnipeg, and others, Madam Speaker. Thousands of direct jobs, not to mention the thousands of other indirect jobs. 8 million hogs last year, Madam Speaker. This is an industry that contributes a great deal to our province in a very real and tangible way, Madam Speaker. This is why what you apply to Manitoba can be applied to every province. Exports matter, and they make a difference. They contribute to Canada's middle class in a very real and tangible way. The Prime Minister made a commitment to Canadians back in 2015 to work hard in developing and supporting and increasing Canada's middle class. And we did that in a number of different ways, Madam Speaker. Whether it was building a healthier infrastructure by spending record amounts of money, to investing in Canadians, to ultimately signing off on these trade agreements, from taking a trade deficit situation from Stephen Harper, turning it into, on the positive side, Madam Speaker, today with trade, a trade surplus. Looking at ways in which we can actually enhance trading opportunities, because that helps build that healthier middle class, Madam Speaker. I think that there are so many opportunities. Earlier this year, I was with the Minister of Agriculture in Manila, Philippines, where we opened up a trade office. And one of the events that I attended to was to go to a local grocery store in Manila, where it actually had a profile of all the many Canadian products that were actually on the shelves for sale. And it was an impressive number of products. And the manager was saying how Canadian products are actually in high demand. And there's so much more potential, Madam Speaker. We talked about other aspects of our agricultural industries at the trade office, Madam Speaker. Earlier in December, or shortly in the next week or so, we're going to be back in Manila with the Minister of Trade to, again, looking at ways in which we can enhance trade opportunities between Canada and the Philippines, two great nations, Madam Speaker. Opportunities for both countries. But we cannot underestimate the value of trade between Canada and the U.S. I thought it was very telling. Take a look, Madam Speaker, in terms of what it is that the Deputy Prime Minister and how she started off her comments earlier today when she addressed the House. And I quote exactly what she had said. Canada is the largest export market for the United States in the world. It is larger than China, Japan, the United Kingdom, and France combined. That's combined, Madam Speaker. She goes on to say, it is also the case that the things we sell to the United States are the things it really needs. We sell the United States oil. We well it in electricity, and we will sell it critical minerals and metals. Canada is essential to the United States domestic energy supply. Last year, 60% of U.S. crude oil imports originated in Canada. And the energy the United States imports from Canada is more important today than it ever at a time when we see how hungry AI is for energy and how important AI is in the economic vision of the new U.S. administration. She goes on to talk about Team Canada, Madam Speaker, listening to the different stakeholders. And what do we get from the leader of the Conservative Party when it comes his time to shine on the trade issue, Madam Speaker? What he says is, well, you know, the Prime Minister is having a Zoom meeting, in terms to belittling that Zoom meeting, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister is actually having a Zoom meeting, yes, with the premiers of Canada, Madam Speaker, with the other First Ministers of the different provinces of Canada and territories, Madam Speaker. I see that as a positive thing. But what we hear from the leader of the Conservative Party, and I see at least one member, well, I can't say, Madam Speaker, I don't want to reflect on it, but it's nice to look at one member across the way, even though he's not necessarily a Conservative member, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the block filling in some of the seats. Having said that, Madam Speaker,
The honourable member not to be referencing whether people are in the House or not. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
But Madam Speaker.
Order, the honourable member for New Westminster Burnie. You know, we're almost running out of time, so.
No, I apologize, and again, happy birthday, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. I just want to be clear, the member from Winnipeg North illegally stated that there were no Conservative MPs in the House for this important
Again, the honourable member knows that you can't say directly or indirectly what you can't say directly. The honourable parliamentary secretary, there's only about 2 minutes left, so I just want him to wrap up.
Happy birthday, Madam
Thank
Speaker. And I do apologize for referencing that there were no Conservatives in the House throughout my speech. My apologies. Having said that, Madam Speaker,
Another point of order.
To say that there are no Conservatives in the House.
Again, I want to remind members that this is that we cannot reference whether there are a lot of people in the House or a few people in the House or certain parties in the House or certain individuals in the House. It would be best if members just allow the speech to continue. There's only 1 minute left. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker. The point is that whether it's the Deputy Prime Minister or the Prime Minister or Liberal MPs in general, we go around and we talk about how Canada, Madam Speaker, is the best country in the world to call home. And we're proud of that fact. While Conservative members of Parliament, led by the leader of the Conservative Party, goes around Canada and inside the chamber and proclaims that Canada is broken, Madam Speaker. And nothing could be further from the truth. We need to realize and talk to how it is that Canada has opportunities to be able to continue to grow and expand our economy, to continue to build a healthier middle class in Canada.
I have a point of order with only 20 seconds left. The honourable member for Edmonton, Griesbach.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I will not be mentioning the absence of the Conservatives today in my point of order, but I will be wanting to wish you a very happy birthday and thank you for presiding over today's very important discussion with all of our colleagues, just minus the Conservatives.
The honourable parliamentary secretary, 2 seconds, if you can wrap it up.
This is a real important debate. It would have been nice if everyone would have, at least some Conservatives would have been here, Madam Speaker.
Again, I just want to remind members that, you know, they're not supposed to say indirectly what they can't say directly. Another point of order.
Honorable member for La Salle-Amère Verdun. Quickly, please, because it's midnight. Happy birthday, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the official opposition, the Bloc Québécois. Thank you, but it's midnight, so it's no longer my birthday. But I do appreciate the special day you have made me experience today. So it being midnight, I declare the motion carried. Accordingly, this House stands adjourned until later this day at 2 p.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. Good evening, everyone.